All right, everybody, I want to take a quick break from the show to thank the sponsor, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeStore.com is where you go to get your CBD products. They recently sent me a stick of their Slav, which you could like kind of put on any place you're experiencing a little bit of pain. And let me tell you something, 5, 6 o'clock after being hunched over on my computer all day, my back, my neck starts feeling a little bit sore. I throw that stuff on and it helps me feel a lot better. I really like it. So I definitely recommend that product myself. But check out all their products. They have extracts, soft gels, gummies. If you're looking for some sleep, a few days ago I ate a couple of those gummies. It was a long day of work. My brain was still wired, but my body was tired. And I ate a couple of those gummies and I went right down. So want a little bit of extra sleep, want a little bit of extra pain relief, check out CBD products at PalomaVerdeStore.com. Be sure to use the promo code PEACE when you check out to get yourself a discount. All right, well, let's get back to the show. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 68, and I am the co-host, Kyle Anazlone. I'm joined by the other co-host, Will Porter. Will, how's it going today?
What's up, Kyle? How you doing? Glad to be back.
Doing well. Excited to have you back on the show. We have Biden's first main speech, foreign policy speech to talk about today. And I mean, it wasn't strong. It didn't have a lot of policy, but it's still important to try to talk it down, break it down, what he did, what he left out. Me and Will get into all the details. We got a couple clips to play for y'all. First, I want to remind people to check out the show at YouTube for the video version. We are also now on library lrby.tv as a YouTube alternative. We have a Subscribe Star account now that's all verified and ready to go, so anybody could donate to the show there. I know a lot of people have hit me up and said they're tired of Patreon, they want something different. So that's there. We're also accepting Bitcoin Cash now. So you could donate to the show that way. We have accounts set up, and the links are the account wallets are in the show descriptions for anybody who wants to donate that way. If you decide to donate through Bitcoin and you want to get in on the Discord channel, just send me an email or a message on something and I will hook you up that way. And we really appreciate everybody who's supporting the show, either by sharing it or physical donations. So, Will, you ready to dive into this thing?
Let's do it, man. This rip-roaring, exciting speech.
Yeah, this is our president, and here we'll play the first clip we have for y'all.
And they know when you speak for me. And so is the message I want the world to hear today. America is back. America is back. Diplomacy is back at the center of our foreign policy. As I said in my inaugural address, we will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's. American leadership must meet this new moment of advancing authoritarianism, including the growing ambitions of China to rival the United States and the determination of Russia to damage and disrupt our democracy. We must meet the new moment accelerating global challenges, from the pandemic to the climate crisis to nuclear proliferation, challenging the will only to be solved by nations working together and in common. We can't do it alone.
So, Will, that is our first clip from the president there. There's not a whole lot of policy directed in there. I'll say the one highlight is he did bother to mention nuclear proliferation kind of at the top as an issue. But overall, what do you think of his declaration that America is back?
It sounds a little corny to me. It sounds like, befitting some kind of cheesy sequel movie or something. Like, we're back, baby. But I don't know. I guess that's how he's trying to sell his whole, his administration now is we're going to pivot back to diplomacy. We're going to his focus here is like repairing our alliances, because a real, common talking point about Donald Trump is that he damaged all of America's alliances, that he trashed NATO, and like now we have to go back and like sidle back up to our buddies and say, to build our relations back up again, which I don't know. I think that stuff is all kind of overplayed and overhyped. But, fine. Like if he's talking about, I'd rather him be talking about rebuilding our alliances than like we got to go and get all the bad guys. But we haven't quite got to that part of the speech yet.
Right.
There is a bit of that.
It is worth, I think, touching on just real quick, Will, because me and you have talked about it in the past on the show. Things like extending and building on the American alliances, the Quad in Southeast Asia, Japan, Australia, India. That was all going on under Trump. Trump floated the idea of an Arab NATO. That's all. He strengthened. Not that this is a good thing. America's relationship with Israel, and the far right of that government there, and then also when it comes to NATO, he extended NATO, literally added more members to it, and he also pushed U.S. troops further and further eastward and closer to Russia's border. So, other than some like public disagreements with these countries, and I guess in one sense that Joe Biden could maybe be right is he's very concerned about climate change. Something I don't think either of us are advocates for the Paris Climate Accord or anything, but he did withdraw from that. But other than him, that picture of him looking all pouty at a G6 members or G7 summit, I think, I mean, it was all rhetorical. There was actually no damage done to the U.S. NATO relationship. Really, I feel like Marcona actually did far more damage by saying that NATO is brain dead. This is somebody who's hailed as a little bit more of a visionary than Donald Trump, and even he was critical of NATO during the Trump administration. And so I never really understood that argument. And I'm sure for the people of the Middle East and Northwest Africa and everything are probably like, what the hell do you mean America's back and never even left?
Right. Yeah. When did our policies just turn off? But yeah, of course, that's just like the appearance that they're trying to give is that Trump just went around trashing all of our great relationships around the world. But yeah, like really all of that was in gestures and appearances and rhetoric. It's not as if France or Germany or the UK wouldn't deal with the US anymore or something. So that's how Biden's trying to make it sound, though.
Right. Another thing I just want to point out, because I think it's a real theme of the Biden administration, not only overseas, but here in the U.S., is this idea that we need to defend democracy. And he mentions that in the start quite a bit, that we have to ally with the other, democracies of the world, when in reality, a lot of America's allies aren't really democracies, especially, Israel. They claim to be a democracy, but half the people can't vote. Egypt, the second largest recipient of U.S. aid, is a complete, totalitarian state there. All of the Gulf Arab allies, I'm not saying...
Saudi barely even has a legislature, like what kind of democracy are they?
Well, Will, you did hear that there were 3 young Shiite Saudis that were scheduled to be beheaded for protesting while they were minors. And Saudi has commuted their sentences to just 10 more years in prison. So look at all the liberal reforms there. So that was a big part of my, this first that I thought was problematic. Is there anything else, Will, in the first part of Biden's speech here that you think we should mention and highlight?
No, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of this is sort of like rhetoric and boilerplate in the speech. It's supposed to be his big, major first foreign policy address, but a lot of what we get is just like slogans and stuff. So unfortunately, no, I don't think there's much else to say about that part.
All right, I'll go on to the next clip here.
For 5 years, to preserve the only remaining treaty between our countries safeguarding nuclear stability. At the same time, I made it clear to President Putin, in a manner very different from my predecessor, that the days of the United States rolling over in the face of Russia's aggressive actions, interfering with our elections, cyber attacks, poisoning its citizens, are over. We will not hesitate to raise the cost on Russia and defend our vital interest and our people. And we will be more effective in dealing with Russia when we work in coalition and coordination with other like-minded partners.
So, Will, if we only had played like 5 seconds there, I would have been like, all right, extend New START, diplomacy, that's great. But then he gets into all of his kookery and things like that. So let's talk about that, how Biden can't talk about New START without also like being super hawkish on Russia and saying that they did all of these crazy things, attack the election and other stuff. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like that one thing he says about New Start there, that's like the single like non-hostile thing that he says about Russia the entire time. Is that like, oh yeah, by the way, it's good that we worked out this like vital arms control deal. Okay, now let me go back. Let me just switch to the most hostile stuff. And he listed the list of things that he said. We actually, I think, played the clip on the show last week. That's like the same list of stuff that his press secretary Jen Psaki named that when she announced that New Start would be extended. That like, oh yeah, Russia's we're doing an intelligence assessment into their meddling in their election or in our elections, which, what evidence have you seen of that? Like, I haven't seen a shred of evidence that Russia had any meaningful part in the 2020 race, nor even the 2016 race. This stuff has just been said for years now, going unsubstantiated. The one thing that Biden left off his list there, surprisingly, I thought, was the Taliban bounties thing. He actually didn't recite that part in the speech, which is, I don't know, that surprised me a little bit. But yeah, I mean, this is just like, they have this canned list of things that they're going to go after Russia for. Clearly, he's reciting the same list of stuff. And so, yeah, here he is just repeating that again during his big speech.
It will be interesting to see if, maybe Biden, now that he's in office, has, gotten briefed on that intelligence and isn't going to repeat that anymore, knowing that it's probably a lie, the whole bounty thing. And so we should keep an eye and see, what happens to this list if bounties are included. I'm also anxiously awaiting for Senator Tammy Duckworth to tweet the president and ask him why he committed treason by not asking about the Russian bounties, because Donald Trump was treasonous for days and months on end because he didn't ask about those bounties. So it's crazy how certain presidents are judged for certain things and not others. One of the, I guess, the craziest parts about that, and the scariest part about that to me, Will, is the assessment of the Trump Russia policy by the Biden administration. And they really seem convinced. I don't know how they believe this is true, but they seem to believe it's true that Trump rolled over, in Biden's words, for Vladimir Putin. And I just, on a policy level, I don't see how you could look at what happened in the past 4 years and believe that's true. But I was wanting to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that was actually something I wanted to raise too. It's just like the clear implication. I mean, I don't even think he implied it. He directly said that, unlike my predecessor, I'm going to take on Russia, implying that Trump did not do anything hostile toward Russia, which is just outrageous. I mean, you and I think, like, chronicled this well, both in the show, and if people want to go and read our long article, Dangerous Game, at the Libertarian Institute, I think we did a really good job cataloging all the very hostile moves and policies and layers and layers of sanctions that Trump endorsed on the Russians. And so this idea that, like, that, I don't know, just setting the bar like that, setting the bar so low, saying that, like, oh yeah, Trump's policies were rolling over for Russia, even though they were extremely hostile, one of the most hostile administrations against Russia in a while. And I don't know, just saying, like, that's nothing. So Biden's got to ramp it up compared to that. And that's very worrying to see, like, what kind of things he thinks he has to do to not be seen as rolling over to Russia, like he's saying here.
So, there's a couple things baked in that I at least want to mention. Is they're really playing up the Navalny angle, but especially the chemical weapons, alleged attempt on his life. That, well, there are test results that show apparently he was subject to some kind of chemical weapons. I remain skeptical, but even grant that they also roll the Sergei Skripal poisoning into this, which,
Right.
as we talked about in my old show, Foreign Policy Focus, several times, well, there's a lot of reason to believe that that wasn't Russia, but nonetheless, Russia was sanctioned, and the highest number of Russian ambassadors ever were expelled from the U.S. because of that. And so I'm kind of confused because he says I think he says, deep concern about Navalny and the situation there. And he says, we will not hesitate to raise the costs on Russia. And so if Trump already sanctioned and expelled Russian diplomats and I think closed almost all the Russian consulates and embassies in the U.S., what do you think Biden means when he says raise the cost? And what is his deep concern about Navalny, and what could he possibly do about it anyways?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, that's what I was saying. Like, if he's presenting the way Trump acted toward Russia as just like rolling over for them and doing nothing, then I would hate to see what he thinks he has to do to, like, push back on them. like this pressure he has to show that he means business with Russia. Like I would honestly think, like, I don't see Biden, I don't foresee him doing anything extremely brash on this. Like I think it would probably just be a continuation of the same kind of drumbeat of hostile rhetoric and sanctions and stuff. But nonetheless, yeah, like this is going the totally opposite direction than it should, I think.
I guess I do want to disagree with you just a little bit on that, Will, when he has put people like Victoria Nuland and Samantha Power in critical positions in his administration. While Biden may not have any deep plans of meddling in Russia, I think those people absolutely do. And I'm not saying that they're going to go to war or be able to overthrow Vladimir Putin, but it could definitely be actions that Russia will see as hostile and aggressive. And Russia, as they have with either Crimea or Georgia, when there's hostile actions like by U.S. and U.S. proxy groups in places, they do respond in some way. And so, we could, I think, see a very dangerous escalation, especially when Biden has put himself in a position now where his default is, I'm going to be tougher than Trump was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as opportunities present themselves too, something happens in one of Russia's neighbors, one of those countries that the U.S. has their eyes on, that could definitely, lead to a real escalation. I just meant specifically in response to Navalny. I don't know if, but there may be sanctions and stuff. I'm not sure if Biden has plans to do anything real drastic with that, but yeah, I guess we will see. He's got some pretty bad people in his administration.
Right. Yeah. I meant you're right about Biden maybe not having plans. I was just wondering what Victoria Nuland's were. Let's get into this next clip from Biden where he's talking a little bit about what his China policy might look like.
Without condition, we'll also take on directly the challenges posed by our prosperity, security, and democratic values by our most serious competitor, China. We'll confront China's economic abuses, counter its aggressive, coercive action to push back on China's attack on human rights, intellectual property, and global governance. But we are ready to work with Beijing when it's in America's interest to do so. We will compete from a position of strength by building back better at home, working with our allies and partners, renewing our role in international institutions, and reclaiming our credibility and moral authority, much of which has been lost. That's what.
So, well, this is only a few minutes into his speech, just for people who aren't watching the YouTube and can't see the, little meter. It's not like he's an hour in and he's starting to, slur and run out of energy. So it's pretty obviously a Biden speech here. But at the same time, if you're just reading the transcript, I mean, all of this is super Trumpian rhetoric.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
All right. Well, sorry to steal your line there, but I did want to touch on a little bit of what's been going on with China since Biden has taken over, because he sailed warships through the Taiwan Strait, I think 2 guided missile destroyers, and he's also been sailing ships on freedom of navigation exercises around the islands claimed by China in the South China Sea. And so it's not even just on I guess he didn't specifically mention tariffs there, so it'll be interesting to see exactly how he plays with Donald Trump's trade war, because in a sense he's, saying that he's going to be aggressive on China, but kind of like with Trump and Russia, where does he have to go to be aggressive? You can't really ramp up the trade war all that much more, but he's kind of suggesting that maybe he will in some cases, but he's also, kind of continuing this engagement here. He also invited the Taiwanese ambassador to his inauguration, which I guess was the first time that that's ever been official. I suppose the Taiwanese ambassador could go to the inauguration because a public event in DC, and what the hell else is there to do on DC on inauguration day, but I guess they haven't gotten an official invitation in the past, and was another, I guess, sign to Russia that the U.S. is, going to also continue to increase its diplomatic relations with Taiwan and make them more overt, like they did in the Trump administration. That's going to continue into the Biden one. Did you have any more on your take on what his China policy is going to be?
No, I thought it was interesting that he mentions the economic attacks and the intellectual property and stuff. That stuff is very Trumpian. Like he's the only way that he possibly differentiated himself was talking about how, oh, but also we'd like to get along with Beijing. And that seems to be a theme throughout this. Like he'll say all this hostile stuff, and then he has like one throwaway line about how, oh, but by the way, we'd like to not like go to war with them, or so, we'd like to get along with them at some point. So I don't know, like I don't know how you can really trust that. Like he has like the balance of rhetoric is much more on the hostile side than it is on the like, paying lip service to getting along.
Well, you know what? I think even that is pretty Trumpian. The only difference is that had this been Trump's speech, the media would have highlighted that particular quote and said, Donald Trump wants to get along better with dictator Xi Jinping of China. You know why? That would be the...
Rolls over.
Rolls over for China. That would be the reaction to it. He didn't mention the TPP. I wasn't sure what was going to happen with that, because that was an Obama-era policy that they really pushed. And while it's a free trade agreement, quote unquote, and as a libertarian, I like free trade. I'm not a fan of the TPP. It's very managed trade. And some of the IP abuses, I kind of understand why U.S. companies feel like we pay taxes for protection. And so if we, spend a whole bunch of money on R&D to build this like fancy new jet engine, and then China just replicates it and then sells it to our allies or other people, then, that's hurting our market share and blah, 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 blah. That kind of thing. Like, while I, don't support tariffs, as a libertarian, I kind of understand, some of the argumentation there. And I think you would, have to be like, pretty dismissive to just say, well, that's nothing. But a lot of it too is like medicines and stuff like that could be produced really cheap in China, that, will allow a lot more people, billions of people live in China, India, Indonesia, this area of the world. And so that was something that when the TPP was coming out, left-wing critics of Obama were bringing that up as saying that, hey, now you're going to enforce these governments to enforce our IP laws, including on medications, that could cause a whole lot of, people not to be able to get their really cheap medicines that violate the U.S. Intellectual property laws. So I hope they don't push that route, but judging by, Biden's background of being a corporatist, I'm sure there are, corporations very interested in that. Will, should we move on, talk about the last section of Biden's speech that we have here?
Yeah, sure.
So this next part is on Yemen, I believe, right? Yes. And this was, I guess, the most policy that we really got out of it, like specific policy other than steady new start we got in this speech. But also there's a lot left out. And so we'll get into that too after this.
Readiness and resilience in cyberspace. Today, I'm announcing additional steps to course correct our foreign policy and better unite our democratic values with our diplomatic leadership. To begin, Defense Secretary Austin will be leading a global posture review of our forces so that our military footprint is appropriately aligned with our foreign policy and national security priorities. It will be coordinated across all elements of our national security, with Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken working in close cooperation. And while this review is taking place, we'll be stopping any planned troop withdrawals from Germany. We're also stepping up our diplomacy to end the war in Yemen, a war which has created humanitarian and strategic catastrophe. I've asked my Middle East team to ensure our support for the United Nations-led initiative to impose a ceasefire, open humanitarian challenge, and restore long-dormant peace talks. This morning, Secretary Blinken appointed Tim Lenderking, a career foreign policy officer, as our special envoy to the Yemen conflict, and I appreciate him doing this. Tim has lifelong...
All right, well, so that was a little bit of his the Yemen policy that we got. I saw a lot of celebration on Twitter about this. Last week on the Friday show, Will, I had Scott Spalding on, and me and him, I don't want to say debated, but he was far more optimistic about what Biden's Yemen policy was than I would be. And there are some indications here that he may be right. Biden says that it's a horrific catastrophe, which is true, and that he wants to end this war. And his I think Jade Sullivan earlier in the day, the national security advisor, had initially announced that they would be ending offensive support to Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen. And so, taken kind of like the Biden administration does exactly what they say they're going to do, are you celebrating here, Will? Is the war in Yemen over?
Yeah, I mean, so this at least sounds like the most like promising thing I think in the entire speech, where he's saying, yeah, we're going to end support for offensive operations, we're going to try to wind the war down, but it's not really clear to me how like what this will mean in terms of substantial changes to U.S. policy. So we talked about last week how they're planning on freezing weapon sales to a couple like already planned like arms deals that are already in the works to Saudi and the United Arab Emirates. And I think he actually confirmed at some point in the speech that they will be doing that. However, he says only the relevant arms sales. And so we're not even talking about halting all arms deals. Like we're doing a whole like a review of those, just the relevant ones. And I'm not sure which ones they consider relevant to the war on Yemen. So
Dave DeKim just reported today at antiwar.com. I saw that the two were a Boeing bomb sale of 300 Boeing or 3,000 Boeing bombs, and then a arms sale of 7,000 Raytheon bombs, and those were going to both going to Saudi Arabia. The Raytheon ones were smart bombs. I'm not sure exactly the make and model of the Saudi ones, but it's just those 10,000 bombs that are indefinitely frozen is the status of those deals now.
Okay, interesting. So they did now say like which ones are to be like, and that's only two deals. I mean, we've sold them so many weapons over the last few years. So yeah, like now we're seeing they're only going to put a small pause on the weapon sales. Another weird thing here is that Biden said that they would continue support for continue to support Saudi in its fight against Iranian supplied groups. And that's like a major thing to me, I think, because like we're saying we're going to continue to help defend Saudi territory and integrity and all this stuff. But that seems like a loophole big enough to fit the war in Yemen, because like if you ask anyone, the Houthis are an Iranian supplied group. That's the whole talking point. That's Saudi's major talking point. This is all about an Iranian proxy. And so what Biden just said there about we're going to continue helping Saudi Arabia fight its Iranian-backed enemies, that is itself like you could fit the whole war in Yemen in that loophole, I think. So I don't really know how they're going to square that circle. Like those things seem like they are at cross purpose here, and it seems like they could continue to help Saudi do whatever it wants in Yemen and just say, oh, those are defensive operations. These are in defense of Saudi's territorial integrity, not not an offensive operation. We stopped doing those. Right. So I just think like with what he said here, just like the language we're getting, it sounds like there's going to be enough loopholes to continue backing Saudi, continue this war. But I don't know. I don't want to be overly pessimistic about it, but it just seems like, I don't know, if they can fit a war through their loophole, they're going to fit a war through their damn loophole. They're going to do that.
I think it was Syria that Scott Horton said something about, well, that sounds like a loophole big enough to drive a war through.
Exactly.
But to get into a little bit of my thoughts on this Yemen announcement, my first was that, from what the Biden administration has publicly put out, this is good. It's not like he is saying that we need to defeat the Houthis and we need to restore Houthi to power in Yemen. He isn't going the Venezuela route here where he's just like, yeah, we're picking up where Donald Trump left off. Now, the concern is that Yemen was already a humanitarian catastrophe in January 2017 when Donald Trump took over. And so are we circling the clock back to 2016, or are we actually moving forward and getting the hell out of this war? And it looks honestly more like we're circling back to 2016. When you mentioned the defending against the Iranians, at what point, if the Saudis are using these planes to bomb targets against the Houthi and the Americans need to repair them and stuff like that, well, are they going to let those planes be in disrepair in case the Saudis need to defend themselves against the Iranians? Not that Iran's going to attack Saudi Arabia, but that would be, I think, the logic that they're going to have to compete with on that. They're going to have to maintain Saudi's military to be able to fight against Iran. Also, there's I think the first time they blew up the bus with the kids on it in Yemen, their first response to that was, well, they were transporting missiles on that bus. And so they're going to say that bombing missile sites in Yemen is a defensive act. And I mean, is that's not impossible logic to convince people of. So those are some of my concerns. I did read that the U.S. was stopping the intelligence support that I guess they were still giving the Saudis through the Trump administration. I don't understand why we are even giving them intelligence, because they just bombed the cholera treatment facilities and school buses and funeral homes anyways, but we are apparently giving them those. The other, I guess, actual positive news that I think is somewhat meaningful, Will, is that reported, I think Friday, by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, Biden to reverse terror designation of Yemen's Houthis. And he's saying that they're actually going to go back on the move made in the last day of the Trump administration to put the Houthis, the group in Yemen that Saudi's at war against, that controls the terror, 70% of the civilian population, that they are actually going to be removed from the foreign terrorist group list, which means that they won't face sanctions. And so this should, I guess, allow humanitarian groups to continue their work in northern Yemen, which is great. But you know, there's still tons and tons of barriers and obstacles, and this war was a humanitarian catastrophe before this designation was put in place.
Absolutely. And one thing that you'll notice in the speech is that Biden makes no mention, no acknowledgement of the fact, because he does acknowledge that, oh, this is a strategic and humanitarian catastrophe, but does not draw attention to the fact that it was his own former boss, Barack Obama, who, you know, he's soaked it from head to toe in Yemeni blood. This is his policy. This is his decision. As we've mentioned so many times in the show, it was the Obama administration that explicitly decided to embark on this bloody bombing, you know, helping Saudi in its bloody bombing campaign, despite saying that the war would be like long, bloody, and indeterminate. That was the phrase that the New York Times got from the Obama administration. So they willingly embarked on this. They knew that this would be possibly in the cards, this kind of outcome. And Biden was right there as VP as part of that, but he's not going to acknowledge that he has any role to play in this, of course, or that his former boss might. So that's unfortunate, too. And like you're saying, yeah, are we just going to roll the clock back to the end of the Obama administration? That's what he's trying to return to. If so, then that means virtually nothing, because we were already in like genocide, ridiculous levels of slaughter and, you know, humanitarian catastrophe there at the time, even before Trump. So, you know, I think that's unfortunate. Even though this is sort of the best thing we got out of the speech, this is the best part. Even there's a lot of caveats that, you know, aren't too great. Another thing I was going to say is that Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, also confirmed that we would not stop bombing jihadist groups. So we're going to still continue the drone war against AQAP and stuff down there, which just, you know, that is sort of, in a way, theoretically separate from the war against the Houthis, but they do connect in various ways, you know, like, I don't know, the Houthis and the AQAP do, you know, fight each other. They interact too. So
right.
I don't
No, that is actually a war against kind of the side that the U.S. supports in the war against the Houthis, right? AQAP, we know, is well embedded. The AP reported that tons of the AQAP guys joined the ranks of the Saudi, or the Emirati forces when they drove them out of, I think, the ports of Al Mocha and Al Mokela there in southern Yemen. So, you know, they're loaded up. CNN has reported that these Salafist groups have gotten weapons through Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis because they're, you know, essentially embedded with their forces there. And so it's one of those crazy things where this is, I think, a little bit more similar to what Trump did in Syria, where he did stop arming the jihadists there. So he stopped the war against the jihadists in that country, or for the jihadists in that country, which is great. But he continued bombing the hell out of them, you know, for pretty much his entire presidency too. So that it isn't good. War goes on. And so I think that's a little bit of the shift in the Biden policy here. But just like with Trump in Syria, it's not really turning off the war. It's just changing the pressure points in it a little bit. What did you think of the global review on where U.S. forces are deployed? I thought that was interesting because in one sense, hell, you know, me and you get to do that review, Will, and we're going to be bringing a lot of troops home. But it's not going to be me and you doing that review. It's going to be the Ram Corps Atlantic Council paired with former generals and military think thinkers, and my guess is that they're going to say Russia and China.
Yep, exactly. That's what I was going to say too. That this review could be a good thing. It could be a chance for them to say, "Oh wow, look at all these troops. We don't need all these guys overseas. What the hell?" And wow, we just realized that we're in air and we have to change all this stuff. But I get more of the impression that they're going to decide to, this review will conclude that wow, all these current deployments are exactly as they should be, or they're not big enough. Because, like you're saying, Russia and China and all this stuff. And one sort of indication we have of that is that Biden announced that they would be halting the Germany troop. It wasn't fully a withdrawal. Some of it was just a redeployment. And that whole thing was kind of mixed, too, because as far as I understand, some of those soldiers in Germany, U.S. soldiers, would be going further east toward Russia, to other European countries, closer to Russia's borders. But I think some of them were also going home. And so that was sort of a mixed thing. But nonetheless, Biden's freezing that altogether right now. And it doesn't sound like he's going to conclude that, oh, wow, those troops in Germany can come home after all. I'm getting the feeling he's going to keep them where they are, or just move them elsewhere into Europe. So that's this global posture review could be a good thing, but with what we're hearing out of the Biden administration right now, I don't think that's the direction they're going to take it in.
So one thing I didn't catch in the speech, I don't think it was mentioned, and you would think maybe that would have been the section for it, which is what the hell is he going to do about Afghanistan? Right. This is something where, like the Iran nuclear deal, also not mentioned, there's a ticking clock on it. I think 1st is actually the deadline in the agreement worked out by Zalmay Khalilzad, the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan under the Trump administration, what they call a peace deal between the U.S. and the Taliban. And it seems pretty certain that the Biden team is going to break it. NATO has indicated that international forces will remain. And then we have that Congress report, the Afghan strategy group, I think, said that the U.S. forces should remain and shouldn't leave too quickly. And so if they're reviewing where forces need to be, you think that would come up as a topic, but maybe they're not reviewing Afghanistan. They're just going to leave them there. What did you think about this essentially being left out?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple major things. I did want to touch on Iran a little bit too, because that was another thing that got zero mentions. But yeah, it's incredible that the withdrawal from the war in Afghanistan, how that is just such a non-issue now. How is that I don't know, it's our longest running war, but it can just not even warrant a single mention in his first major foreign policy address. He even talked he talked about troop levels and American deployments and stuff, and still didn't mention it. So that doesn't really bode well for me. I don't know, I don't know. Maybe I guess if I'm trying to be optimistic, maybe Biden's okay, we're going to go through with the withdrawal, but it's not going to be that popular, so I'm not going to talk about it much. But I don't know, man. I don't really know where he's going to go from that. Some of the things that I've been seeing coming out of the administration it's not promising. It looks like he's going to withdraw or reverse that and keep troops there beyond spring 2021 when they're supposed to be out.
All right, let's go on to Iran. Tell me what you got there.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, one thing people probably noticed is I think he mentioned the word Iran once, but only in the context of Iranian supplied groups in relation to Yemen. But yeah, Biden did not mention Iran or U.S. policy toward Iran a single time, which I think sort of might give you an idea of how he's going to prioritize this issue throughout his administration, which I don't know. That's not good. Zero mention of Iran, zero mention of the nuclear deal, which, the Donald Trump administration got out of in 2018. So there's got to be some way, or not got to be, but I would hope there's some way that they're going to look to return to that deal, or at least make some pretense to returning to it. Just the other day, the Iranians were saying that the U.S. can't just waltz back into the deal. When Trump unilaterally abrogated it in 2018, he reintroduced all the U.S. sanctions. So there's a pretty big hurdle now to us returning to. We'd have to get rid of all these sanctions. There's a lot of stuff that has to be done. And the Biden administration doesn't seem like they're in a hurry to do this at all. They were saying just the other day that how there's many steps that we have to take before we can even start talking to the Iranians. We have to deal with the other parties to the deal. And then also Jake Sullivan just the other day was accusing the Iranians of or saying that they're getting close to having enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon.
2 weeks away.
Doing his best Benjamin Netanyahu impression, where Iran is perpetually just on the cusp of getting a nuclear weapon. And so that to me signals Biden's not going to be a very good improvement on this. I don't think he's going to make it a huge priority to get rid of sanctions or return to the deal, one or the other. I would just I don't know, the deal to me is not as important as sanctions relief. I think that's the major thing. Whether we formally get back in the deal or not, I don't care that much, but the sanctions relief is the huge thing. doesn't seem like Biden's really eager to do that, to rescind the U.S. sanctions. So I guess we'll have to see.
Right. This is the hashtag trust the science administration, and we're going to
Yeah.
believe in facts and stuff. And here you have the National Security Advisor suggesting that somehow Iran is going to enrich uranium from 20% to 90%, which they've never done, and then turn that into a nuclear bomb in a matter of weeks. This takes countries years to do. And he's saying that they're going to do it in weeks. It's crazy how unscientific that they are at times when they're constantly signaling on trust the science. I saw this today, well, just before we recorded, and it says this was a question asked, I believe, on Face the Nation. Biden says the U.S. won't lift sanctions until Iran halts enrichment. Now, I thought one of the interesting things is how this conversation unfolded, which is he was asked, will the U.S. lift sanctions first in order to get Iran to return to the negotiating table? No, Biden replied. They have to stop enriched uranium first. Mr. Biden nodded affirmatively. And so, Will, first of all, let's just say, how many people, random people, could you pull off the street that would be able to ask Biden better questions about the Iranian nuclear program than that? It doesn't even make sense, right? Because the JCPOA allows Iran to enrich uranium. So, so the line of questions doesn't even make sense. But if Biden really is taking Iran enriching uranium off the table, he's not even in the world of negotiations that would have made sense in 2015 when they first put this damn thing together. This is crazy.
Now, I wonder if Biden is just like, sleeping at the wheel. He doesn't really understand what he's being asked. Because I've heard other people in the other people in the administration, I've heard them say things like, oh, Iran has to return to compliance with the deal. Because right now, Iran is enriching slightly above the level that's set out in the deal. However, that's directly in retaliation to the U.S. violating it. And the Iranians are under the impression, if you read like the negotiating documents and stuff, the Iranians are under the impression that if the U.S. violates the deal, they're allowed to also like scale back their compliance with it. Right. So that's their understanding of the agreement.
It does say that in like clause 36 of the deal. You can interpret the deal differently, but you can interpret it that way. And it's not like, this magical, like, the First Amendment says there's freedom of speech. So that means you can say anything the government approves you to say. It's pretty close in the wording in Iran's interpretation. It's pretty close. It's good.
And I think they even declare it in some of the documents too. It even says like the Islamic Republic of Iran will take it to mean, they sort of like lay out their intentions of what they'll do if there's violation. And so that's the situation right now. The Iranians are enriching slightly beyond the levels set out in the deal. And the Biden administration has been calling on them to return to those levels that are within the deal. The Iranians, of course, say, no, you're the one who violated first. You have to return to its terms, and then we'll consider it. But Biden is just like, he doesn't even understand what the hell is going on. He thinks that uranium enrichment in general is the issue, which is just insane. That's incredible.
Yeah. No, I think I recently heard either Blinken or Sullivan, I can't remember which one, was asked about it. And they had suggested that even a step-by-step process, which, is something that Iran has suggested, and it would kind of make sense. Like, the U.S. will lift sanctions on Iran's construction sector, and in return, Iran will reduce their enrichment like that down to like 5 or 6% or something like that. These kinds of things could happen. They'll shut off advanced centrifuges once the oil sanctions are lifted. Those kind of measures. But actually, what he was suggesting sounded like first Iran had to return to the deal, and then the U.S. would decide if they were being compliant enough and if they would get back into it. And then I don't know if you caught Gareth Porter's most recent article, but he was talking about, and I think this is the case with the Biden administration, that these people actually believe that while maybe Trump's Iran policy wasn't smart, that it's put them in a strategic advantage, a better position with Iran than they were before, that this maximum pressure campaign means the Iranians have to negotiate it, which isn't true and isn't the direction Iran's going to go on this. And so I'm very worried the Biden administration can make a huge miscalculation on what they think is going to happen with Iran. And I don't want to I don't know if the Iranians would go as far as to make a nuclear bomb or something like that, but they'll certainly continue to advance their weapons programs. Not that they have a nuclear weapons program, but whatever weapons programs they have, in order to be ready for a potential attack should it come.
Yeah, that's right. And just earlier this week, I saw the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif. I think he went on CNN and he was saying, "Hey, man, like we're ready to start discussing this. We're ready. We got
Mm-hmm.
European partners. They can broker some talks." But in response to that, Biden's people had said something about, "Nah, we don't know. We don't think so. We think we have a lot of steps before we even think about doing that." So I guess that's kind of consistent with Biden not even mentioning it once throughout his speech, is that they're not really in a hurry to figure this out, unfortunately.
So I thought those were like all of like the key little details I had pulled from the speech. Well, was there anything like anything other? I did have one major theme I want to touch on though.
I don't know. The theme I mostly noticed was just like he tried to pay a little bit of lip service to to getting along, but on balance, it was not a amicable speech. It was mostly vowing to go after our enemies and to coordinate the world, coordinate our allies in a crusade for democracy against the big bad authoritarians. So unfortunately, that is sort of like the Wilsonian vibe I got from the speech.
Right. I was gonna say pretty much the same thing, which is there was this quote are these two things that Biden said that I thought together. The America is bad thing, but then he says we cannot be absent any longer, and we are a country that does big things. And those two things are really concerning to me. When if Biden's idea of what a successful foreign policy will look like, because while he is speaking in platitudes, I think those platitudes do indicate how you could convince the president to do something now, and what kind of actions he would look to take. And if he thinks that we're a country that does big things and we've been absent from the world but now we're about to fix it, what does that mean? And I think the first kind of country that's lined up here is actually Myanmar, where the coup happening just after Biden takes office. I will guarantee you, Will, in 6 months we'll see articles in Foreign Affairs calling Myanmar Biden's first foreign policy success after the sanctions on that country or whatever. But who knows why? I mean, it may be a complete disaster and they can't call it a success. But I think they'll at least try to paint that as a success. I hear they're trying more targeted sanctions. And you know what? One of the crazy things about all this is, Will, is apparently the military in that country was very influential in the, that Aung San Suu Kyi woman was something of a figurehead, the civilian leadership of that country anyways. And so now that, the military, they want to go back to the military just having like a little bit more of a bad seat role in all this. It seems crazy that we're going to, sanction the hell out of a country about that. But that seems to be the game that they're about to play here. These are grand chessboard type people. They have all their pieces lined up, and I think they're ready to start taking out some of the people that they think they can.
Some dictators start defending democracy.
Well, the right dictators will, not the, they're not going to go after al-Sisi. I wonder if Biden will call him his favorite dictator before this is all over.
Yeah, that's Trump's favorite dictator.
As much as I think this is somewhat irrelevant, I don't want to completely dismiss it. How weak did Biden look during this speech? I know that Trump wasn't the strongest speaker. He wasn't always the most coherent. It made sense or anything like that. But this was not, the speech of somebody in their prime. That's definitely the case.
Yeah, man. Like just even re-listening to it while we're recording here, I'm amazed by just how old and like doddering and tired and he is. And I was reading through the transcript. Whoever transcribes Biden's speeches writes in his stutters into it. It's hilarious. Like you can actually go through and each one is documented in the official record. All of the stutters. It's perfect.
Oh, in the White House, even.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's fantastic. Yeah, he has a lot of stars in there. He looks unimpressive. He looks kind of confused after the speech is only 15 minutes long. I mean, at least with Trump, he is up there speaking forever. He go on for a couple hours and do like 5 of those rallies in a day. And this guy, was cooked after 15 minutes. So And the reason I think that's important, Will, is that the weaker Biden looks, the tougher he's going to think he has to be. And this
Yeah.
is, a fatal flaw that the Democrats have and have had for a while. But I think that can't completely be dismissed. That the president looking weak during a speech where he's proclaiming strength, I think he will feel like he has to look even stronger in his actions. And of course, we talk about strength and actions. Like Ron Paul is a strong man, and let me tell you something. He would give all those generals the finger and tell them to bring the troops home. But when Biden's going to be strong, that means he's going to, sanctions, bombs, and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. That is like what I think Obama in his own memoir recently was like quoting Rahm Emanuel, his chief of staff, saying how a liberal president can never look weak and never roll over and all this stuff. And that's the same dynamic I think here with old tired Biden.
All right. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. We'll be back hopefully again next week, and I will. This will be out tomorrow. So good talking to you, buddy.
All right, you too, Kyle. See you, everybody.